Chapters 3 and 4 of the Maxwell Mystery by Carolyn Wells. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 3. The Belted Earl. Clarence, Earl of Clarendon, was arriving; wherefore the feminine guests at Maxwell Chimneys were peeping with careful discretion through curtains and window blinds, in their impatience to comment upon the appearance of the distinguished visitor. But from their vantage ground they could see only a big, heavy-coated figure emerging from a motor car, followed by a quantity of foreign-looking luggage. "He's gone to his rooms," announced Milly after a skirmishing peep into the hall, "and of course we won't see him until dinner time. Come on, Irene, let's go and put on our very bestest frocks. I wish I had a tiara or a coronet. Do you think I'd better wear feathers in my hair, or just a wreath of roses?"
"I'm sure I don't know about earls," I put in, "but I'm sure, Miss Leslie, that most men prefer natural flowers to those fanciful confections that you young ladies sometimes perch on your heads."
"You tell us, Mr. Maxwell," said Irene Gardiner, as our host entered the room. "Do you suppose earls prefer made-up hair ornaments, or natural flowers?"
"Bless my soul, I'm sure I don't know," declared the bewildered old gentleman. "I never was an earl."
"You ought to be," said Mildred, smiling at him. "Your manners are courtly enough to grace any what do earls grace, anyway?" "Well, as one will grace our dinner table pretty soon, it would be wise for you girls to run away and get ready to do your part of the gracing," said Miss Maxwell, smiling at pretty Milly, who was in her most roguish mood. "I simply can't dress, Miss Miranda, until I decide between my silver filigree headdress and a wreath of pink roses."
"Nor I," said Edith. "I believe I'll wear a single rosebud."
"Yes, do," said Mildred. "Do wear the simple little blossom, dear. It will make you look younger."
As Edith was only 2 years older than her sister, this could not be called an unkind sarcasm.
"Baby face," she retorted. "Nothing could make you look younger, unless perhaps you carry a teddy bear in your arm." "I've a notion to do just that," said Mildred, laughing. "I must shock that English prig somehow." "How do you know he's a prig?" "All Englishmen are. I've never met any, but I'm sure they're snippy and critical, and not a bit like our own brave lads. I've lost interest in him, anyhow. You may have him, Irene, if you want to."
"That's all very well now, but as soon as you see him you'll appropriate him."
"No, I won't, honest. I hereby make over to you whatever interest I may have had in the noble Earl of Clarendon, and promise not to interfere with your game, if you choose to add his very likely bald scalp to your other trophies of the chase." "Oh, pshaw! That won't do a scrap of good if you even talk to him or look at him at all," said Irene, putting on a rueful look. "Just as Mr. Crane said, if you sweep your eyelashes round once he'll be done for." "All right," said Mildred. "Then, furthermore, I promise not to talk or converse with the above-mentioned Clarence beyond the ordinary civilities of the house; never to smile at him voluntarily, and never to wave my eyelashes at him across the table. And now," she rattled on, "I know I'll be late for dinner," and then she ran away to her own room.
Presumably she took great pains with her toilette, for it happened that she was the latest to enter the drawing-room. She had elected to wear a gown of palest blue organdie, which, though of simple effect, was in reality a marvelous confection born of art and science. Her hair was massed in a curly topknot, secured by shining combs, and on her soft fair neck rested a string of wax beads, which she chose to call the Leslie pearls. Her cheeks were a little flushed with the exertion of her hasty dressing, and fear of tardiness lent her an apologetic air, half timid and half cajoling, as she crossed the room to her hostess. Miss Maxwell stood near the fireplace and smiled indulgently at the pretty dismay of her young guest. Mildred smiled too, and then, raising her eyes, suddenly discovered that at Miss Maxwell's side stood 6 feet 2 of man, with the broadest shoulders she had ever seen.
"Oh!"
she almost gasped. "I thought—" and then she seemed to realize that a formal introduction was being made. She dropped a slight and very dainty curtsy, and as she was about to raise her eyes to the face which she naturally assumed surmounted this column of humanity, she remembered she had promised not to wave her eyelashes at him. Convulsed with the ridiculousness of the situation, she stammered a greeting which meant nothing, and resolutely turned her face away. "What's the matter, Mildred? Are you ill?" said Miss Maxwell solicitously. "Oh, no, indeed," said Mildred, raising her blue eyes to meet the elder lady's glance, and just giving the Earl a three-quarter view of her really wonderful lashes. "No, that is, I was afraid I would be late for dinner, you know." "Nonsense, child, don't be foolish. Talk to Lord Clarence for a few minutes before we go to the dining-room." So Mildred dutifully talked, but in a moment dinner was announced, and it fell to her lot to be escorted to the dining-room by my humble self. "What's the matter?" I asked, after we were seated at the dinner-table. "Why did you turn down his noble nibs so soon? You scarcely spoke to him." "Too English for me," said Mildred briefly, not wishing to discuss his lordship. "He's a handsome chap," I went on, "and he's a good all-round fellow, too. I've been talking with him, and he's broad-minded and fair, with a keen sense of humor. Go in and win, Millie. I'll give you my blessing." "No, thank you," said Mildred, turning her eyes resolutely away from the stranger. "Columbia is the gem of the ocean for me." "Why don't you announce your engagement to Philip, and have done with it?" I said audaciously. "One reason is that I'm not engaged to him," said Mildred calmly. "But you will be. He has every chance in the world." "That's where you're wrong. There's only one chance in the world that I shall marry Philip Maxwell." She smiled as she remembered Philip's emphatic assurance that he should ask her once more only. "But I'm not going to marry anybody for years yet. Let's talk about something more interesting. Look at Phil now. He's devotedly reciting poetry to Irene." "Oh, that's your more interesting topic, is it? But wait, the noble Britisher is making good. Just listen to that yarn he's telling. He's a ripping good story-teller." And Mildred, listening, was forced to agree. On the terrace after dinner the party broke up into small groups of 2 or 3, and Mildred, quite unintentionally, found herself talking to Lord Clarendon, or rather he was talking to her. "Don't run away," he said, as she tried to edge off toward another group. "Stay and talk to me." "I can't talk to you," she said, stammering a little, because and as he smiled at her she continued in sheer desperation, because I don't know what to call you." "Don't you know my name?" "Yes, but I don't know whether to address you as my lord or your lordship." She knew she was talking nonsense, but she was honestly trying to get away, and so said anything at random. The Earl stood looking down at her with his half-mocking smile. "Either would succeed in attracting my attention, if I heard you. But why not call me Clarence?" "It's a stunning name," said Mildred, "but I couldn't use it so soon. Indeed, I never can." With a sudden determination she turned abruptly and walked away, leaving him standing there. "By Jove!" said his lordship to me as he looked after her. "I can't make her out at all. But she's a dear little enigma." The evening wore away, and it was quite late when Mildred and I again together for a moment saw someone coming near. Then a kind voice over her shoulder said, "Is it possible that this little lady's afraid of me?" There was a laughing note in the voice, an amused yet self-assured tone that seemed joyously confident and contradictory to the words. I wondered what reply she would make, for the terrace in the moonlight was a dangerous place. Acting on a sudden impulse, whether courage or cowardice I didn't know, she whispered in a broken voice, "Yes, I am afraid of you," and turned swiftly and suddenly away from him. Philip was never very far away from Mildred's side, and though he was glad to notice her apparent lack of interest in the Earl, he was at a loss to understand her persistent rejection of the nobleman's advances. "What's the matter with the belted one, Millie?" he asked. "I'm sure I don't want you to chum with him, but why treat him with such desperate scorn?" "I don't scorn him, but he doesn't interest me. said Mildred a little impatiently, for she was beginning to be tired of her own game. But Philip was not entirely unversed in the whims and ways of the eternal feminine, and he responded: "Oh ho! Piqued, are you?"
"Indeed I'm not. And pray, why should I be?"
"Oh, for many reasons. Perhaps because Clarence is so devoted to Irene. She'd look well wearing a coronet, wouldn't she? It would suit her tall stateliness a lot better than it would your petite effects."
"Don't talk any more about that horrid Earl. I'm tired of the thought of him."
"That's your attitude toward everything," said I.
"Oh, no, it isn't," she responded saucily. "I never get tired of myself, and I'm not yet tired of you."
"Don't think of him, then," said Philip. "I'm truly glad if you don't like him. But your overdoing it so made me a bit suspicious. You see, I know your tricks and your manners."
"Am I very bad, Philip?" said Mildred, a little wistfully.
"You are, indeed. You're a heartless little witch, and you'd not only flirt with a wooden Indian, but you'd know just the best way to go about it."
"Thank you for the subtle compliment. And yet, with all my faults, you—"
"Of course I do, and always shall. Does it please you to know it?"
"Not especially,"
said Mildred, her mocking eyes smiling gaily into Philip's handsome, earnest face.
"And I shan't talk to you any more now, for you seem to have only two subjects of conversation, yourself and the Earl of Clarendon, and I don't care a straw for either."
Philip only smiled, for though Mildred's words sounded indifferent, the glance that reached him from beneath the long lashes belied the words, and I am sure strengthened his conviction that the butterfly heart was really his. I left the pair then, and strolled away in the direction of Irene Gardiner. 4. Saucy Mildred.
"I'm so glad we're going to have a dance to night," said Edith Whiting at luncheon next day. "Oh, so am I," declared Mildred. "I'd rather dance than eat. And we haven't had a real party dance since we've been here."
"Give me 4 two-steps, won't you, Miss Leslie?" said I.
"Why don't you ask for 8 steps? Can't you multiply? Indeed, I won't give you 4 two-steps, Mr. King."
"Oh, I do so hoped you would," I responded in mock dejection.
"Why, how can you expect it?" she exclaimed. "There'll be a lot of strange men here from all the country round, and I'm going to give them all my dances. I can dance any day with you men who are staying in the house."
"Do you mean that, Miss Leslie?" exclaimed Clarendon, in such apparent consternation that everybody laughed.
"On second thoughts, I'll give you one apiece all round," said Mildred gaily.
Philip sat next her at the table. "You'll give me more than that," he said in a low tone, "or else you needn't give me any."
"Very well," said Mildred airily. "You needn't have any. Lord Clarendon, if you care for 2 dances to night, I have an extra one that has just been returned with thanks, which you may have."
"I accept it gladly, fair lady. But don't let it be one of your American two-steps, for I have not yet mastered their intricacies."
"They shall be any ones you choose," said Mildred, with a glance at the Earl that was deliberately intended to delight him and to anger Philip, and succeeded perfectly in both cases.
"Mildred," said Tom Whiting under his breath as they left the table, "you are playing with fire."
"Perhaps I wish to get burnt,"
she retorted saucily, and ran laughing away. That afternoon Philip and I chanced to find ourselves alone for a time. I was glad, for I hadn't had an opportunity to talk much with him. We sat in a shady corner of the veranda, and he looked moody and glum. Finally he threw his cigar away and said frankly, "What would you do with her, Peter?" "Do you want me to answer you seriously?" I said, "or flippantly?" "Seriously, please." "Then I think you'll have to teach her a lesson. You let her go too far, Philip, and you may find when you try to curb her you can't do it." "I know I can't, King. She's reached that point already." "Then begin as soon as possible. Tell her that she must either be engaged to you or not. And if she is engaged to you she must stop flirting with the Earl." "Good heavens, Peter, it isn't the Earl that bothers me. It's someone quite different." "Who?" I asked in astonishment, but just then we were interrupted and I had no answer to my question. But it bothered me for a time. And I couldn't help wondering if by any possibility Philip could be jealous of me. It seemed absurd, for though of course I admired Millie Leslie, as everybody did, yet I wouldn't for the world have intruded upon Philip's rights. I could get no opportunity to speak to Philip again on the matter until that evening after dinner. The ladies had all gone away to dress for the dance, and Philip and I chose to stroll and smoke in the rose garden. But again my intention came to naught, for Earl Clarence joined us. Philip seemed in better spirits than in the afternoon, and he chaffed the Earl gaily, in an unusually merry mood. It was after dark, but by the faint light of a moon which had not yet risen we saw what seemed almost like a fairy being coming toward us. It was Mildred, and she was wrapped in a voluminous cloak of pale blue, beneath which showed a pair of dainty white dancing slippers. "Oh!" she exclaimed, drawing back as she recognized us. "I thought you were the gardener." "To which one of us did you pay that compliment?" inquired Philip, laughing. "Oh, I won't be partial. I thought you were all gardeners," said Mildred, drawing her cloak around her and seeming about to leave us, though I felt sure she had no such intention and was coquetting as usual. "Do you want a gardener?" said I. "Won't I do for one?" "Well," and Mildred hesitated, "I was just dressing for the dance, you know, and I found I must have, simply must have, some of those tiny yellow roses that grow over there. I would have sent the maid for them, but I know she wouldn't select the very tiniest ones, and those are the ones I must have. So I thought I'd just run down and get them myself. I never dreamed I'd meet anybody." Though the blue eyes looked babyishly innocent above the closely held blue wrap, I felt a secret conviction that those same eyes had seen the group of men in the rose garden, and did not mistake us for a group of gardeners. "I knew everybody was dressing for the dance," she went on, "so I thought I couldn't possibly meet anybody." She pouted a little, as if we were to blame for interfering with her plan. "It doesn't matter that you have met us, dear," said Philip gently. "I'll cut some roses for you. Which ones do you want?" Millie was a tease, there was no doubt about it. She smiled at Philip, and then turning deliberately to the Earl, said, "You're the nearest to the yellow rose tree. Won't you cut me some, please?" Philip spoke no word, but stood for a moment looking at the girl he loved. Then in a tense, unnatural voice he said, "Clarendon, will you look after Miss Leslie?" and turning on his heel walked rapidly away. "Millie!" said the Earl, eagerly stepping toward her. It was the first time he had ever addressed her so, but Mildred had no intention of precipitating matters in this unconventional situation, and, too, she was troubled at the remembrance of Phil's disapproving glance. "Lord Clarendon," she said coldly, "will you be so very kind as to pick me a few yellow roses, and let me hasten back to the house?" "There is plenty of time," he said quietly. "Please give me a few moments." "No," said Mildred, stamping her foot impatiently. "I wish to return at once." "Very well," said Clarendon gently. "I will not detain you. Will you have this spray?" He selected a charming cluster of roses, and taking his penknife from his pocket, cut them for her, and stood trimming off the thorns. "I wish I might have given you flowers to wear this evening," he said. His manner was gentle and deferential, and I was sure Mildred perhaps felt she had been too brusque, as she said kindly, "I wish so, too. But how could you have bought any flowers way off here in the country?" "I could have sent to town for them, or gone myself for them." "But I oughtn't to accept real hothouse flowers from you." "Why not? Because it would mean a special favor on your part. But that is just what I want it to mean, dear little girl." "Oh, Lord Clarendon, please don't. Please give me my flowers and let me go." "Will you consider them a gift from me, as I can't get any others now? And will you let them mean—" "Oh, no, they don't mean anything, not anything at all, yet." He had taken her hands and placed the spray of roses between them, and still held the two little hands, roses and all, close clasped in his own. Her long cloak, released, fell away, and the vision in the pale silken robe seemed to the noble Englishman quite the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. He caught his breath as he looked at the baby face with its troubled, beseeching eyes.
"Please let me go, Lord Clarendon, please."
Then she gently disengaged her hands from his, and gathering up the folds of her blue cloak, prepared to run away. But he detained her a moment. "Miss Leslie," he said, and his choking voice betrayed his passion, "I won't keep you now. But to night you will give me an opportunity, won't you, to tell you—"
"To night, my lord, you are to have one dance with me, you know."
"One? You promised me two."
"Oh, I never keep dance promises. I'm not at all sure I shall give you one."
"But I am sure you will, you tantalizing baby. Now, which shall be the first one, that I may call mine?"
"Choose for yourself, my lord," said Mildred, in her most demure way.
"7 is a lucky number. May I have number 7?"
"Yes, I'll save that for you."
And with a laughing glance over her shoulder she ran away. "What a little witch she is, to be sure, eh?" And Earl Clarence gave a short laugh. "I beg your pardon if I offend," I said a little stiffly, "but I think you, that is we, ought to remember that she is pledged to Philip." "Ah! I did not know it was announced." "Nor is it, officially. But in this country we accept such a situation without words, if we are friendly with the people concerned." "Indeed?" was the cool response. "But the men of my country have their own code of honor, and it is not to be impugned." This was a fine opening for a quarrel, but as I had no intention of indulging in a dispute with our titled visitor, I said only, "I have no criticism to make of the English code of honor, I'm sure," and turning on my heel, I left his lordship among the yellow roses. Soon after, standing in the lower hall, I watched Mildred Leslie come dancing down the stairs. She wore a short dancing gown of palest yellow chiffon, and in her shining curls nestled the tiny yellow roses. It was an unusual color for a pronounced blonde to wear, but it suited her dainty beauty, and she looked like a spring daffodil. Of course, she was immediately surrounded by would-be partners, but Phillip Maxwell was not among them. "Sulky," said naughty Mildred, as I asked her where he was.
"Well, it will do him good to worry a little."
As was usually the case, pretty Mildred was the belle of the ball. She halved most of her dances, and changed her mind so frequently about her partners that she soon tore up her programme, declaring it bothered her, and she should accept invitations only as each dance began. She finished the 6th dance with me, and as we sauntered about after the music ceased, we met Philip apparently looking for her. "The next dance is ours," he said, looking at her in an unsmiling way.
"Indeed it isn't,"
declared Mildred, who had by no means forgotten to whom she had promised the 7th dance. "It is," said Philip sternly. "Come." "Better go," I whispered in Mildred's ear. "He's in an awful huff." Meekly she allowed herself to be led away, and Philip took her out on the veranda. "Now," he said as they passed out of hearing, "with whom are you going to dance this next dance? With me or with that confounded foreigner?"
"With him, Philip," said Mildred, very quietly. "I promised it to him before the party began."
I was thoroughly angry at the little coquette, and I turned away and strolled idly through the rooms. I did not feel like dancing for the moment; and seeing Miss Maxwell sitting alone in a corner of the drawing room, I went and sat by her for a few moments' chat. She seemed preoccupied, and after some perfunctory answers to my trivial remarks, she said: "Peter." She always called me by my first name, and somehow her soft, sweet voice gave the ugly word a pleasant sound. "There is something wrong with Philip. I can't imagine what it is, but for a week or more he has been so different. It began all at once. One day last week he came to luncheon looking so harassed and worried that my heart ached for him. I said nothing about it. We are not confidential as a family, you know. I only tried to be especially gentle and tender toward him. But he didn't get over it. He spoke sharply to his uncle. He failed to show his usual deferential courtesy to me, and he behaved altogether like a man stunned and bewildered by some sudden misfortune. I talked to his uncle about it when we were alone, and he too had noticed it, but could not account for it in any way. He thought perhaps it might be money difficulties of some sort, and he offered to increase Philip's allowance. But Philip refused to accept an increase, and said he had no debts and plenty of spending money. So we are at our wits' end to understand it." "Could it have anything to do with Miss Leslie?" I asked. "I think so," replied Miss Miranda, looking about to make sure we were not overheard. "He is very much in love with her, and I think she cares for him, but she is such a coquettish little rogue that one cannot be sure of her. Besides, this trouble of Philip's began before he planned this house party, and before he thought of inviting Miss Leslie and her sister down here." "Does he talk frankly to you about Mildred?" "Oh, yes. He hopes to win her. Indeed, he says he feels confident of succeeding. But I think he tries to persuade himself that he will succeed, while really she is breaking his heart over her flirtation with Gilbert Crane." "Gilbert Crane!" I exclaimed, greatly surprised. "Why, I thought she was flirting so desperately with the Earl." "Nonsense! Mildred is just teasing Philip with him. When she flirts so openly, there is no danger. But she conceals her liking for Gilbert Crane. He's here to night, and I'm sure I don't know what will happen." "But Gilbert Crane, why, he's a friend of Philip's." "Yes, our fellow townsman, and one of Philip's best friends." "But he can't hold a candle to Philip." "I know it. Philip is rich, or will be, and Philip is handsome and talented, while Gilbert is none of these. But somehow he has a queer sort of fascination over Mildred, and she is certainly very gracious to him." "Philip and Gilbert are as good friends as ever, aren't they?" "Yes, I think so. At least they were until lately. But Mildred's evident preference for Gilbert's society has wounded Philip, and though he treats Gilbert as kindly as ever, I've seen him look at him as if he wondered how he could play such an unfriendly part." "You think, then, to put it plainly, that Gilbert is trying to win Mildred away from Philip?" "I do, and I think Philip is as much hurt by Gilbert's treachery as by Mildred's fickleness. But I cannot think that it is this affair that worried Philip so last week. For then Mildred hadn't come, and Gilbert was right here all the time, and he and Philip were inseparable. No, it's something else, and I can't imagine what." "Phil seems about as usual to me," I said. "Yes, he is much brighter since you young people came, more like his old self. But when he's alone, even now, he drops into an attitude of absolute despair. I've seen him, and it is something very dreadful that has come to my boy. Oh, Peter, can't you find out what it is, and then I'm sure we can help him." I assured Miss Miranda that I would try in every possible way to do all I could to help, but I felt convinced that no one could help Philip at the present time except Mildred Leslie herself. Then Mr. Maxwell came in and joined us, and the tenor of our conversation changed. I should have been glad to talk with him about Philip, but owing to his deafness I couldn't carry on such a conversation in the drawing room. But notwithstanding his affliction, Mr. Maxwell had a fine ear for music and greatly enjoyed it. A piano, violin, and harp furnished the music on this occasion, and as it was of exceedingly good quality, Mr. Maxwell sat and listened, tapping his foot gently in time with the rhythm. I saw him glance at Philip several times, and if the boy was smiling, the old gentleman's anxiety seemed relieved, but if Phil was over quiet or sober looking, Mr. Maxwell sighed and glanced away again. The drawing room was the front room on the left as one entered the great hall that ran through the center of the house. Back of it was the billiard room. Back of that, Mr. Maxwell's study, and behind that a well-filled conservatory. On the right of the wide hall, the front room was the music room. Behind it was the dining room, and back of that a short cross hall and a butler's pantry; the kitchen being still farther back. The large library was on the second floor,
and was in many ways the most attractive room in the house. There were bedrooms on both the second and third floors, so that Maxwell Chimneys was well adapted for generous hospitality. A broad veranda ran all around 3 sides of the house, both on the ground floor and second story, and on it, from most of the rooms, opened long French windows. After watching the dancers for a while, Miss Miranda urged that I join them, and though I would have quite willingly remained with her, I did as she bade me. "And, Miss Miranda," I said as I left her, "don't worry about Philip's affairs. I'm sure you exaggerate to yourself his despondency, and I can't help thinking that soon matters will be brighter for him." Chapters 3 and 4